Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the online briefing. Sorry, let's mute the chime, please. Welcome to the San Francisco Interfaith Council online briefing for faith leaders. Today's special topic is Downtown San Francisco, Congestion Study and Pricing. Pardon me, we are going to start all over again. Good morning and welcome to the San Francisco Interfaith Council online briefing for faith leaders. Today's special topic is Downtown San Francisco Congestion Study and Pricing. This event is hosted by the San Francisco Interfaith Council and supported by the Joint Information Center of the San Francisco COVID Command Center. Today's meeting, the audio, video, and chat will be monitored and recorded for record keeping and quality assurance. By default, all participants will be muted and video will be turned off to minimize distractions. To submit a question or comment, please select the chat button at the bottom of the screen and send a message to Q&A. These questions will be collected and shared with the Interfaith Council at the end of the meeting for response. A reminder that everyone living and working in the city of San Francisco can get tested for COVID-19. To learn more, please visit sf.gov/gettestedsf or simply call 311. And please enjoy Labor Day weekend safely. Remember to wear a face covering, plan safe social gatherings, and be the trusted messenger. Once again, welcome to the San Francisco Interfaith Council online briefing for faith leaders. And I will now hand it over to Michael Pappas, the Executive Director of the San Francisco Interfaith Council.
Lynn, thank you so much. And thank you to the COVID Command Center's Joint Information Center Virtual Outreach Team for all that you've done. I believe that this is our 20th show together and program, and we are very indebted and grateful for all that you've done. Good morning. I'm Michael Pappas, and on behalf of the San Francisco Interfaith Council, I want to welcome you to this morning's online briefing for faith leaders. As we move toward economic recovery, we expect to see the return of congestion, possibly at greater levels than before. There's already evidence of traffic building up at key downtown hotspots as we slowly anticipate the reopening phase. San Francisco is exploring how congestion pricing policy could keep traffic moving and achieve goals around street safety, clean air, and equity when the economy does recover. Could congestion pricing be the key to a faster bus ride, a smoother drive downtown, more reliable deliveries, a safer bike trip? Most importantly, could it help create a more equitable transportation system? Colin Dental Post and Paige Miller from the San Francisco County Transportation Authority will address these questions and more at this week's online briefing for faith leaders, hosted by the San Francisco Interfaith Council and supported by the COVID Command Center's Joint Information Center Virtual Outreach Team. And now, without further ado, I'd like to welcome the Chairman of the Board of the San Francisco Interfaith Council, Kaushik Roy.
Thank you, Michael. As Michael mentioned, my name is Kaushik, and as chair of the board, it's my great pleasure to say good morning and welcome to all of you. Thank you for joining us. And Michael, I can't believe we have done 20 of these, or I should say you have done 20 of these. And it started off as a sprint. It's clearly a marathon, and you and our second staff member, Cynthia Zamboukas, have been amazing. So thank you for this and everything else the city has asked you to step up for during the pandemic. I want to give a special welcome to any of you who are joining us for the first time. Thank you for being here. At the beginning of every interfaith event or meeting, there is an interfaith statement we'd like to read. So I will do that now and we'll proceed from there. This is an interfaith community. Whatever our individual belief, it can be freely expressed here with no apologies. If we are invited to offer a prayer in this setting, it should be offered according to the tradition with which we identify. If we are invited to speak on a subject from the perspective of our tradition, we are free to do so without fear of offending those who come from another tradition. We come together as people of faith to learn from each other that we might better understand the multiplicity of faith traditions in our city and in our world. Good morning, everybody.
Rishi, thank you. And I just wanted to say, we're doing this together, and I just want to thank you personally for the commitment that you've made to join us every week. I know it's a huge commitment of time, both in terms of your own position as the executive director of the Shanti Project and as a father and a husband. And so thank you for the commitment you have made. I'm in a unique, privileged position this morning to welcome both to San Francisco, but to our interfaith community, the new pastor and head of staff at Calvary Presbyterian Church, Reverend Marcy Glass. I had the good fortune of meeting with Marcy last week and sharing with her really that the Interfaith Council was birthed at Calvary Presbyterian Church, and we've been sort of tied at the hip for the 31 years that we have been at this. And I just think it's a great privilege to welcome her and to ask her to ground us in a meditative moment.
Good morning, everybody. It is wonderful to be with you. I am looking forward to being in ministry with you here in the city. I would like to read from, I want to start by saying I have no idea what the Presbyterian Church has to say about congestion pricing, nor the broader Christian tradition. But I do have a parable of from Jesus in the 25th chapter of Matthew's Gospel that I think might help us. So hear now these words. The kingdom of heaven will be like this. 10 bridesmaids took their lamps and went to meet the bridegroom. 5 of them were foolish and 5 of them were wise. And when the foolish took their lamps, they took no oil with them, but the wise took flasks of oil with their lamps. And as the bridegroom was delayed, all of them became drowsy and slept. At midnight, there was a shout, "Look, here is the bridegroom, come and meet him." All the bridesmaids got up and trimmed their lamps, but the foolish said to the wise, "Give us some of your oil, for our lamps are going out." And the wise replied, "No, there will not be enough for you and for us. You had better go to the dealers and get some for yourselves." And when they went to buy it, the bridegroom came, and those who were ready went with him into the wedding banquet, and the door was shut. Later, the other bridesmaids came also, saying, "Lord, open to us." But he replied, "Truly, I tell you, I do not know you. Keep awake, therefore, for you do not know the day nor the hour." And I want to start by saying I'm opposed to the very premise of this entire parable that women should have to sit around in the dark waiting for some guy to show up. But I also think that I recognize that may not be the point of the story, but I wonder if we're keeping awake in the right way for God. And I'm not sure they get it right in this parable, in truth. I recognize that there are different limitations that people have that allow them to have or to not have oil. I can walk into any oil store and buy oil without being profiled because of my race. I think about bridesmaids in Flint, Michigan, who are still waiting for clean water and are having to buy bottled water. When are they going to have time to go buy oil? I think about people who are food insecure or homeless. How, when they're having their basic needs met, how are they supposed to worry about stocking up on other things? What I want is for us to create a world where the other bridesmaids say, "I got plenty, here, let me share." Or, "There's enough light from my lamp, you can walk with me." I feel like we can create a society where everybody can walk in light and not in the shadows, and that we can share what we have in a way that gives everybody space. So I look forward to hearing today and learning more about how congestion pricing works. But let's start with a moment of prayer. Please join me. Holy One, we ask that you would help us keep awake in the right way for you, that we may help our fellow bridesmaids on this journey, that we may create equitable and just worlds that give everybody the equal opportunity to thrive and to enjoy their lives and to live as you have called and created them to be. So guide us in your work that we may light the path. Amen.
Amen. Pastor Glass, thank you for framing really the issue of the day, because in addition to safety and clean air, I think as I'm understanding this issue of congestion pricing policy, the overarching issue is that of equity. And that's what you've lifted up today. So that will help us to usher in and to the presentation that we are about to hear. I'm really pleased to welcome to the stage today Colin Dental Post and Paige Miller of the San Francisco County Transportation Authority. We've worked together on Erie Rapid Transit and other issues, but today I think we're in a unique position to hear something which I understand is cutting edge. There was an article in today's Examiner regarding this policy, and I know that today it's an opportunity to share with the greater faith community something that is being shared with communities throughout San Francisco to engage the public in a response. Although there will not be an active question and answer period, I would encourage everybody to use the chat and go to Q&A, and if you have questions, we will get them to our chief presenters, both for a response, but also an opportunity for the public to be able to weigh in and give some thoughts that will be helpful in developing analysis and recommendations. And so without further ado, I welcome Colin Dental Post, Senior Planner, and Paige Miller, Senior Communications Manager at the San Francisco County Transportation Authority.
Thank you, and we really appreciate having you share this space with us this morning. And I think this is something we're doing a lot of thinking about, and I know there's a lot on people's minds overall. So I think hopefully this is informative, and also we're really excited to get your input on this. John, can you mute your thanks? So let me see if I can share my screen again here. Okay, so you should be able to just see the intro slide. Is that working? Mm-hmm. Great. Yeah. So again, thanks, and I'll get started here. And Paige is on our communications team, so she's working hard to set up lots of different opportunities like this for people to get involved. So we can talk a little bit more about that and other opportunities for folks to share with us your thoughts about this and ideas as we conclude. So first, I think we want to start off thinking about how our current reality of coronavirus has really changed our lives, everyone's lives, as everyone's really trying to think about kind of the present moment and trying to keep ourselves and our families and communities healthy. And so that has created some questions, I think, that we've had to work through with folks, and we do have a policy advisory committee that has lots of representatives from different stakeholder groups, especially groups focused on equity, to think about what does this mean for a congestion pricing study. We did start this study in 2019 before congestion mostly vanished with the pandemic. And so we had to think about, what does this mean for this study? And we don't, of course, know exactly what our post-coronavirus future would look like. But as we think about what we would want it to look like, the thinking from a lot of the folks we've talked to has been, we should continue to think about what we want the future to look like, because our economy has been resilient in the past. And as we have come out of previous recessions, we're expecting that our economy will rebound from this recession and pandemic as well, and is likely to bring again congestion back to the fore and all of the different problems that are associated with everyone trying to drive downtown at the same time. And so this is about how we plan and prepare for the recovery that we want to see from the pandemic, so that it could be maybe a little different than the past that we have left behind. And so this is an important time to be thinking about that. And so that's why we're really grateful that you're able to join us and help us think about this today. So the image before you here shows what congestion looks like downtown in the city when it had reached record levels last year. And what you can see there in the top right is that's the northeast part of San Francisco, of course, downtown, and Soma, the Tenderloin, that are really were the core of the most congested streets in the city. And that's also the core of our city's transit network. So we're seeing a lot of our transit and buses getting stuck in traffic there, as well as people who are driving. And there were three main reasons that congestion increased dramatically between 2010 and 2019 when it hit its peak. About half of the increase was because of growth, and that's both the number of people in the city and also the number of jobs. And of course, when more people are moving around, many of them are driving, and that adds to the congestion. And the second reason, and the second half of that increase, was because of increased demand for ride-hail vehicles like Uber and Lyft that add to the number of cars circulating downtown as well. And congestion really affects everyone in many of the same ways and some different ways. So whether you're driving or trying to ride the bus or take rail that's on the surface, the street surface, then you're getting stuck and you're having delays and wasting time trying to get wherever you're trying to get to, whether it's to work or to a medical appointment or service or whatever it is that folks are trying to do. But also having too many cars on the road means more crashes and collisions, and it also means more pollution and noise, and makes it more difficult for people who aren't driving or taking transit also to get around and cross the street. But its effects are most concentrated on people who are in lower income and communities of color, and that's for several different reasons. First of all, people who are in those communities are more likely to be riding the bus generally versus driving, and so the bus is stuck in traffic as well, and it's going even slower than car traffic, as slow as 6 miles per hour downtown before the pandemic. And then the second reason is because people are more likely to live in neighborhoods that have a disproportionate number of car crashes and therefore injuries and deaths as a result of having so many cars on the road. Also, that generates a lot of pollution that causes concentrations of asthma and other health effects. And lastly, people who are lower income disproportionately spend their income on transportation. So they spend more of their income on transportation, and that makes it harder to afford, of course, everything else. So the map here just shows how the orange streets, which is the Vision Zero high injury network, where our injuries and fatalities are concentrated, overlaps with, in purple, the communities of concern. That's low-income communities and communities of color, folks who don't own cars, as well as that same grid of northeastern streets where our congestion is concentrated. So all of these things really overlap. And there are a number of things that the city has done over time to try to address congestion, whether it's deploying officers to try to keep things moving at key intersections, or better managing street parking to try to keep things, circling from happening, to encouraging more efficient ways of using our street space by creating bus lanes and protected bike lanes, and also a tax on ride-hail trips to try to fund those things. But as we saw from when congestion was at its peak, all of that just wasn't enough. And it's really difficult to build our way out of this problem because there's just so much demand for driving when the economy is strong and not enough road space in our dense city. So this is one of my favorite pictures we have because it actually shows a bus lane, or rather it doesn't show it because it's full of cars trying to turn right. And so this is an example of where the city has tried to put in infrastructure to make it easier and faster to take the bus, but the bus is really just stuck in traffic because there's so many cars clogging up the street. So the idea then is we really need to reduce the number of cars driving downtown during rush hours when our economy improves, in order to make our transit, walking, and biking improvements work as they're intended. And so as we think about how to do that, we want to keep in mind strategies to help shift people from cars into more space-efficient ways of getting around. And so that's where incentives come in, to try to use our street space more efficiently. And that brings us to the idea of congestion pricing, which is the idea of charging a fee to drive downtown during weekday rush hours. And that could keep traffic moving. It also can be combined with discounts and exemptions, as well as investments too. So that's a whole program. And when traffic returns, this could reduce driving downtown at peak times. And it's one of the most efficient or effective ways cities around the world have addressed congestion. So it's in place in a number of cities in Europe, as well as Singapore, and New York City was the first American city to approve a congestion pricing program that they're now working to put in place. So London was one of the key cities that has implemented this. It went in 2003 and has had a number of benefits, ranging from reduced congestion to increased transit ridership, and also reducing greenhouse gas emissions to have a positive effect on climate change. Stockholm had similar effects when it launched its program as a pilot in 2006. And there were, one of the interesting aspects of the Stockholm story is that before the program went in place, 2/3 of residents were opposed to the idea. But then they implemented just a temporary pilot to test the idea. And after that, 2/3 of people voted in favor to make the program permanent because they had seen how the program could work to have all these different benefits. We've actually studied this idea once before in 2010 and found similar benefits could accrue to San Francisco if we put a congestion pricing program in here. And again, that could be reduced crashes and reduced vehicle delay, improved transit speeds, and also we looked at business effects, which would be generally neutral as well. And because of all those different benefits that the study found and have happened in other places, congestion pricing has shown up since then in a number of different city and even regional plans and policy documents, including things like our Vision Zero action strategy to eliminate traffic deaths in San Francisco, and also things like our climate action plan to meet our climate goals. So with all of that, and as congestion was peaking, our Transportation Authority Board, which is also the Board of Supervisors wearing a different set of hats, asked us to look at this idea and come up with an answer to the question of whether it could work in San Francisco, kind of restart this conversation, and also really focus on the idea of could it be fair and equitable. So we started by looking at some data on who is driving into downtown San Francisco, or rather who was before the pandemic. And one of the things that that analysis found was that 3/4 of the people driving into downtown on a typical weekday were coming from within the city. And so that may surprise people in San Francisco that only 1/4 of people are coming from elsewhere around the region, particularly the East and South Bay directions. We also looked at this by income, keeping that equity question in mind. And what you can see here is that the folks in the bottom bar on the slide, that's the high income group, and that those are kind of disproportionately a large number of people traveling into downtown, and also they are most likely to be driving. And then as you move up into the top two bars, the lower income groups, folks are much less likely to be driving and much more likely already to be taking transit, walking, or biking. So overall, 13% of all the people driving down, or sorry, coming downtown in all different ways in morning rush hours were people who were low income drivers. And those would be the people who would be most concerned about from a fairness perspective and equity perspective, making sure that they're protected from any potential harm. So in thinking about how congestion pricing could work for San Francisco, this is what things looked like when it was at its peak. Buses were stuck in traffic. People were trying to cross crosswalks that were blocked with cars. And so the way this could look potentially with a congestion pricing program and how that could work is having some people pay a fee to drive downtown, and other people could either drive at a different time or travel by a different mode, taking transit or walking or biking. And then everyone could enjoy a smoother ride. Well, certain groups like travelers with low incomes or people with disabilities could get an exemption or a discount from the fee. And then the revenue from the fee could be reinvested in things like safer streets, better and more transit, and potentially other benefits. And that's one of the things we can discuss. And overall, in order to see the benefits that we've seen accrue to other cities with congestion pricing, we think what we would need to do is reduce car trips during weekday rush hours downtown by at least 15%. So that's our target. And we think that if we did that, we could make substantial progress on 4 key goals of a congestion pricing program. And those are, first, to get traffic moving. And by this, we're talking about both reducing the amount of traffic delay and also improving, speeding up buses. And we also don't want to reduce the number of people coming downtown. We want to keep that, maintain the number of people coming downtown, just shift people from driving, encourage them to take other ways of getting downtown. In terms of safety, we're talking about reducing the number of crashes and injuries happening. And in terms of cleaning the air, we're talking about 2 things. Number 1, reducing our greenhouse gas emissions to meet our climate goals, and also reducing the number of particulate pollutions. That's pollution. That's the unhealthy matter that is causing a lot of our health problems. And fourth, we want to advance equity. And that means both protecting low-income folks from cost increases with discounts and exemptions, and also prioritizing program improvements for low-income communities and communities of color. So here's what potential boundaries could be like, and we're looking at some different options for how we could meet those program goals. So this zone under consideration is in northeastern San Francisco. That's, of course, where the congestion is worst, and also is designed to include all of the freeway ramps in that area, while being hopefully relatively easy to understand. So we drew relatively straight lines in our map here so that people could hopefully understand it easily, but these boundaries are flexible. So this is definitely something we're interested in hearing feedback about how this would affect folks and whether we should think about adjusting these. So also in our analysis so far, some of the things that we've found may work best would be having an inbound configuration. So there are a number of different ways you could implement congestion pricing, but this is where people would pay a fee during weekday rush hours to drive into that northeast downtown SoMa zone. And under this scenario, people would not pay a fee to drive back out. So it would just be an inbound fee. And then to accommodate people shifting to transit, this would include a 20 to 25% increase in the amount of transit serving downtown. And we're also looking at other ideas like having a fee that may be a little lower that would apply both driving in and out of the zone as well. In terms of discount packages, we've really tried to focus here first on income, and then we'll also look at some other ideas. So here are 2 different scenarios that would meet that 15% target. And that includes a moderate discount scenario where there would be a $10 fee to drive in, but with a 50% discount for people in those lowest 2 income categories, and also for people with disabilities. Another option could be a $12 fee, but that would include a 100% discount for people in that lowest income category. as well as that same 50% discount for the low income category. So those are a couple ways we could balance things out to meet that 15% target. And we are also still looking at other discount ideas as well. And these are things we're also gathering feedback about. So that includes things like having a discount for people who live within the zone, discount for people who pay a bridge toll already. So would have to pay otherwise both full fees. People who may need to make several trips downtown, and so maybe there could be a maximum of how much you pay if you need to make several trips, and also transit discounts. So people who are low income could have free or reduced cost transit as well. That's something the program could potentially fund. So this is the schedule of how of this particular study and this phase. So we're right now at step 4. And so what we're doing now is we're gathering input on what elements should be in a congestion pricing program and what people would like to prioritize. So we'll use that input to develop several different scenarios for consideration. And then as we get into step 5, we'll be analyzing those and then doing another round of community engagement in the winter. And we'll be sharing the analysis results and then getting feedback then about how we should move toward a final recommendation that we plan to bring back to our board in the spring. So all of this is at least a couple of years out. As I was saying at the beginning, this is about thinking about the future and our recovery, and thinking about as people are getting back sort of towards normal, how do we accommodate the number of people wanting to travel downtown again? And one of the things we're a little concerned about is what we've seen in other places where congestion pricing, or rather where economies have opened back up, is congestion sometimes actually gets even worse than it was before the pandemic, because people who are uncomfortable with transit, even once we can accommodate a full number of people on a minibus again, people may still be kind of stuck in a mode of driving and feeling uncomfortable, even if there's a vaccine. So that's where we want to think about our recovery and how can we encourage people back into the ways that would get as many people downtown as we need to be there in order to support our economy and our businesses and a healthy city. So that's the thinking we're taking, but this would be at least a couple of years out, because there are lots of different steps in order to actually get to implementation. So that would be the Transportation Authority Board would need to vote to move forward in the spring, and then we also would need state authorization as well. There'd be a number of steps to work out all the details of how the policy would and the system would work, and all of that would also involve a continuing set of community engagement to work out those details. And then so there are a number of ways that people can get involved, and we are also doing all of these things in parallel with a lot of work with different communities who are in those lower income communities, who are in communities of color, and also folks who don't have great digital access. So we're working with a texting survey so that people without the digital access can access that. And we're also working with community organizations to do workshops with folks to help us design a congestion pricing program. So people can email us to give us their feedback, as well as visiting our website, sfcta.org/downtown. That game there's a game we have where you can design your own program. That's the same thing we're using in the workshops that people can use online. So that's an exciting thing that's on our website, and we'd love people to engage with that. You can participate in the text, and also we are doing community presentations to whoever wants them and is interested. So these are all different ways, and also just signing up to get emails and stay in the loop. Those are all different ways we'd love to get people involved beyond our conversation today. And that concludes my presentation, and thank you so much.
Excellent. Is Paige going to be chiming in, or are we moving now into the next section?
Colin covered the general ways that folks can get involved, but I'd be happy to share more details if people have questions.
Excellent, will do. First, I have to apologize. I received a call early today. Our first community panelist, Deacon G.L. Hodge, has taken ill and will not be able to join us this morning. I know that the concentration of congestion pricing policy is the downtown area, but we were also recommended to engage folks from, say, the southeast sector and the Tenderloin to chime in as well, to just give a sense of what it's like to drive in those areas as a barometer as well. And really pleased to have with us today Nancy Nielsen, who is the Deputy Director of Lutheran Social Services. She wears many hats. She's also the Secretary of the San Francisco Interfaith Council Board. I would say in the Tenderloin, where Lutheran Social Services operates, we probably have the highest concentration of faith-based social service agencies operating. And, I will tell you, from the back to the time of the recession, when their budgets were cut by 30%, to the tech boom, where a lot of these agencies were displaced because of affordability issues, trying to retain and recruit staff. There's a whole host of issues that they're dealing with. Nancy is a resident of both San Francisco and Sonoma, so she can bring a personal perspective. But Nancy, from everything you've heard, and if you could kind of give us an impact also of how the COVID has impacted your work vis-a-vis what you've heard today, we would welcome your perspective here, and then to ask whatever questions you have of our guest presenters.
Sure. Let me make sure my mic is working here. You can hear me?
Perfection.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. I have so many thoughts rushing through my head as I listen to all of this. And it might be just to kind of go through a list. The one question I think for all of us is that while we're afraid of congestion coming back and being even worse, I think there's still kind of a question out there is how many people who've gotten from our large corporations, tech companies, how many folks are really going to come back to the office? I just question that, is that really, we don't know what's going to happen when people have gotten accustomed to working from home would be one thing. Congestion before the pandemic in downtown and in the TL was horrible, as everyone knows. I think we experienced the greatest increase in traffic congestion was with the advent of Uber and Lyft. The number of cars coming into the neighborhood was just overwhelmingly huge. And not only the number of cars, but from my own perspective, the rate of speed that they traveled on our streets was just really distressing. I still see a lot of that today with cars coming into the TL. And now that there are fewer cars on the street, the ones that are on the street are going even faster. So it's increased our level of sense of danger on the streets in the TL, and we've had some really bad experiences. In terms of from my own staff, I have 35 staff in the city, most of whom do not own their own cars, most of whom travel on public transportation. The few that, but reality is they also don't live in the city by and large. They can't afford to live in San Francisco, so they are coming from the East Bay and other places. That adds another whole level of concern. Going back to the use of public transportation for most of them, it was very frightening with the pandemic. Many folks were really, oh my gosh, how will I get to work? I'm really afraid to be on that bus. My family is afraid for me to be on that bus during COVID. Some of that anxiety is eased at this point, but it's still a concern. It's just a huge concern. And I think you alluded to that. Will people go back on the bus when the pandemic's over? It's costly. That would be the other thing. I look at myself. I've recently started living for now in Sonoma. I calculate coming to work every day is a $40 cost if I pay for parking and bridge tolls, and then that's not even including my mileage. So the cost factor. One thing to consider if you are, going to implement this plan, it may be something that needs to be done with a lot of support from some of the companies that need their workers who are coming in and using their cars to come in, that somehow there's a share of cost from the employers in the city. So yeah, I think those are my first reactions looking at this. I mean, on the one hand, we all want air pollution to go away. We want an improvement in our environment. I have to say, commuting in the last few months has been a whole different world, with freeways that are actually not bumper to bumper and skies that until recently were pretty blue. So that's a lovely goal to have for the long term, and not to go back to that kind of congestion. But it is a complicated, many-layered problem, and I commend you for taking it on and looking for solutions. I would encourage, as you are doing, to continue with conversations that include as many users, particularly of public transit, as you can. I think that will make a huge difference. So those are my first list. Yeah, that's it. That's it for now.
Nancy, I heard you loud and clear, and I'm hoping that our presenters made some mental notes. This whole process started pre-COVID, and now we're in COVID, and there are some big overarching questions. What will be the future of rideshare in San Francisco? What will be the future of working remotely? And taking into account also the costs that have not gone away. I'm wondering if Colin and Paige, if you can respond to Nancy's these chief concerns, because I think that they're valid and certainly should be taken under consideration as these deliberations are being made.
Yeah, those are definitely great questions, and there are definitely things that that we're thinking about, and frankly, we don't have all the answers. I think one of the kind of perspectives we have is we're sort of, the analysis we've done so far in terms of what would work is based on 2019 data, because we wouldn't implement congestion pricing unless there's congestion. And so, that's kind of the best baseline we have to go with. But definitely, we're watching what's going on. And we actually also have a tracker, and I'm wondering if it's possible to send out the link. Maybe if Paige, do you want to see if you can find that for folks that may be interesting? We have a tracker that's tracking congestion on like a week by week basis. And so we're really kind of watching what's going on the ground as things evolve, and definitely the announcements from employers and so forth. So it is unclear what's going to happen in the future. And I think as we move forward here and come up with some different possible congestion pricing scenarios, one of the things we want to do in our agency is working on is doing some scenario testing of what if more people are working from home, or what if people are less inclined to take transit, or there's less transit on the streets as we recover from COVID, and kind of what would those different scenarios look like with these congestion pricing ideas, and under what scenarios would it make sense to implement a congestion pricing program. So those are definitely all questions that we also are thinking a lot about. I think we are expecting that congestion will return, just based on what we're seeing kind of already having it increase. And even if some folks are working from home, it may be counterbalanced by other people tending to drive more. So we'll have to kind of see how that shakes up. But just based on the data we're looking at so far, we are seeing it start to increase some more. And then ride hail, I think we don't know, again, what Uber and Lyft are going to decide to do, and whether kind of their threats and so forth will come to fruition, or how that will shake out. I will note, though, that when we did our previous congestion pricing study, back in 2010, Uber and Lyft actually didn't exist. And that was one of the things that, we were thinking, how much new study of this idea do we need to do? And that, that's something that's new for this study to look at. And so we are looking at how we can kind of deal with that issue. But there was congestion even before Uber and Lyft came along. They certainly have made it worse. So even if Uber and Lyft were to decrease or go away, we would anticipate that some of those folks who are riding in those vehicles would likely be driving themselves, and we may go back to kind of the way it was when there was a little less congestion, but still certainly congestion. So we're kind of moving forward with this idea that we want this tool to be something that's kind of in our toolbox for when congestion presumably gets back to being at unacceptable levels, but we're definitely going to need to keep looking at what conditions are like on the ground and kind of doing some of that scenario testing as we go forward. So definitely really appreciate those thoughts.
And I'm sure that you'll take all of these notes with you as you're formulating all of your decisions. And I did tell you on a previous program, we had the director of the San Francisco Municipal Transit Agency, Jeff Tumlin, and he did, confirm what you were saying, that with an eye to the future, congestion is something that needs to be on the table, and this is the time to be talking about it and thinking about it. That said, I'd like to welcome John Knox-White, the Planning Programs and Education Manager. I've known John since 2011, I want to say, or 2012, when we began working together on all things related to parking and transit in San Francisco, in addition to Bike to Worship, as well as a whole host of issues. In my office, I have the planning department's map with 800 dots of properties owned by religious institutions and communities of faith. We're in every neighborhood. We're on practically every street. And so it's been a joy to work with John all of these years to see how cooperatively institutions of faith and communities of faith can be partners with the city on so many issues. John, I know that this has got to be a challenging time for the agency. In addition to everything that Colin shared with us, I drive around the city and I feel like I'm in Europe sometimes because I see alfresco dining, and that's taking up parking places. Excuse me, and I know that because of the ridership being down, that economically this has impacted the agency and its ability to do its work. I know, and I also know you're working sort of on a parallel track with Colin and Paige on some of these issues. I'm wondering if you could give us the MTA's perspective, and forgive me, I'm a novice, but if you can explain the difference between the MTA and the San Francisco County Transit Authority, that might be helpful too. John?
It looks like John's audio and video, he is frozen at the moment. Here he is, he's back again.
Back, he found his voice.
He's got to unmute, there we go.
Sorry, yeah, of course my internet appeared to bog down right as you asked the question, but thank you very much, Michael. I appreciate it. And as you know, I've enjoyed our partnership, the partnership of our organizations and everybody that we work with. I want to start with a couple of things. I really want to give just so much appreciation to our sibling agency at the TA and the work they're doing on this project, because I think one of the things our agencies have strong commitments to is this equity question, and it's really heartening to watch the conversation that they're having around congestion pricing and the way that they're centering equities and communities' concerns in it. But before I jump to your specific question, I did want to just I really appreciated the comments that Nancy had as well. And one of the things I get to proudly say without having to be overly humble, because I'm not a part of it, but my colleagues in our transit division have done such an amazing job of maintaining safe transit for our community. We have no cases of transmission that we know with COVID on our vehicles, and actually, quite honestly, that's a pattern we're starting to see across the country. So while there's this concern of people riding the bus together in closer quarters, actually the data seems to suggest that actually that's not a huge concern. And we've had one of the lowest, if not the lowest, employee COVID positive of any transit agency in the country. So as we come back, I'm not saying, hey, everybody run back and get on Muni right now, but as we do start to reopen and start looking at our options, we are doing a lot of important work to make sure that Muni will be ready and will be safe for people to ride. As I've been listening to the presentation, and two quotes have kind of stuck with me. I really wanted to appreciate Pastor Glass and her reading, and also her interpretation of the reading. Rahm Emanuel once said, never let a good crisis go to waste." One of the things that we have talked a lot about in this just terrible time that we are in is, nobody was happy with the way our transportation system was working in January and February. So if we just say, let's just keep doing that, I think we will have missed an opportunity to really take this time where traffic is down, and to reimagine how things can be. This congestion pricing project is a years-long project. We are not going to have congestion pricing anywhere next year. But now is the time for us to look at how our streets are being used. The alfresco uses, we're seeing increases in biking and walking. We know that people would like to use transit, but transit gets bogged in traffic. How can we build back in a way that builds the system we would like to see, as opposed to the system we had that we weren't happy with? There was a pastor from Richmond at one of the first conferences I ever attended when I moved to San Francisco, to the Bay Area, early 2000s. And it turns out he was quoting Henry Ford, but I like to quote the pastor instead. If you always do what you have always done, you will always get what you already have. And I think that, to me, that is for this conversation. We may not be able to institute congestion pricing tomorrow, but if we are not looking at where we have been and how we move forward out of this with an eye to what do we want and how can we do things differently, I think we will have missed a really big opportunity. I can't do a better job than Colin and Paige have done in explaining why we should be looking at congestion. But I do just want to, this equity question, back to Pastor Glass's comments, we can say, well, we can look at it very simply, like a straight reading of the parable, and say, oh, there are no equity questions. It's just some people have to pay more and some people don't have to pay as much, and that's inequitable. But if we don't dig deeper and start thinking about the assumptions that go into those comments, if we don't think about the fact, as Colin pointed out, that let's say people in the Bayview ride transit more and are impacted when transit doesn't work for them. If we don't look at how we can better provide access and mobility for the people who need it, the fact that the people who can work from home are higher income professionals in offices, and the people who need to come to work tend to be more heavily oriented in service jobs and whatnot. If we're not looking at a way to help make access and mobility better for our essential workers right now, and instead thinking about the people at the higher end, that 40% of people who are the ones driving into the financial center, if we're making those decisions, we're just continuing inequities that we have built into our system over decades. And so I think this is a really great process. And just to round out my comments, Pastor Glass said, I'm not sure where this intersection is with faith and congestion pricing, but I think where it is at least for me, an important place beyond the how could this impact houses of worship and faith, how can we engage our communities in these organizations to be thinking about equity and thinking about how we can do things differently, and engaging them in this conversation with that lens so that they can provide the information we need, that the TA needs to really come out with a fantastic proposal.
Thank you, John. This has been a very, very rich conversation. I did want to invite Colin and Paige if you had any responses to what John had to say, or if there was anything that maybe in the course of this conversation an epiphany came to you all that you wanted to address. This would be the time to do it.
No, I really appreciate what John added here, and kind of thinking about, John is, as you can see, better at pulling quotes from leaders' faith and not than I am, or reattributing quotes as well. But I think it's just really valuable to kind of think about where we are and who is being most affected already before this crisis, and also kind of deepening those inequities now as people try to navigate this. And I get to work from home, and there are so many people who don't, and we need to have the system work for everybody, and hopefully be able to recover in a way that does improve the system we're looking at and everybody is experiencing on the ground, and maybe preserve some of those blue skies that Nancy was talking about, and be able to enjoy some of the benefits that have been slight silver linings in the crisis here, while building our economy back and having folks be healthy and safe, even as we hopefully do that in a way where we have fewer crashes and people getting injured in traffic and breathing unhealthy air and so forth. So I think those are all really valuable things. And I think maybe one other thing I wanted to touch on is just the regional aspect of this. I think in thinking about all those folks that you mentioned who can't afford to live in San Francisco and come in from the East Bay, those are folks that we also want to keep in mind as we're doing this work, and thinking about ideas like some of the discounts and exemptions, but also how we could potentially improve transit service and provide better options, or maybe things like discounts on for folks who are riding transit. We want to be thinking about those, not just for people who kind of are within San Francisco, but also with a regional perspective, and keeping those people in mind as well who are needing to come from further away, because our housing market, well, who knows what's going on now, but generally our housing market is such that it is much more affordable to be living outside of San Francisco and so people end up needing to be making those commutes into the city for their work. So or to attend services, or so many other things as well. So there are just a couple of additional thoughts, I think, from the conversation that came to me.
Great. Paige, did you want to get the last word in?
Yeah, just to note, both Colin and John have mentioned how we've been really working to focus the study on equity. And just for a little background on that, when we started the study, we held a bunch of one-on-one conversations with community leaders, primarily representing low-income communities of color in the city. And we shared our outreach plan with them, and we said, what do you think about this? And we said, we want to do a round of workshops with your communities. And we started those out earlier this year, right before we actually intended to do this first round of outreach, and then shelter in place happened. Mm-hmm. So we hosted 3 in-person community workshops, one in the Tenderloin, Excelsior, and in the Bayview. And they were great, 2-hour-long workshops where we talked to groups of 30 people. One was all in Cantonese. So we're, really touching base with people and diving deep with them. And after shelter in place started, we paused that outreach to reassess. We had discussions with those community leaders. We also have a policy advisory committee that Colin mentioned that has a lot of equity organizations on it. And they all said, keep going. And so we've transitioned those workshops from in-person to remote. And we're mailing people packets in the mail and talking to them on the phone and on webinars and doing these workshops still. and we're compensating community members for their expertise as well. So
Great.
we're still doing this first round of outreach now, but we will be doing a second outreach around, as Colin mentioned, in the winter. So if folks have ideas of groups that we should be working with, whether it's workshops or whether they just want a presentation or just want to hop on the phone with us, we'd really love to talk with them. So we're all ears. Feel free to reach out to us and share with us anybody in the community who you think would be important that we're reaching out to.
Thank you, Paige. The mission of the San Francisco Interfaith Council is not only to celebrate our rich, diverse religious and spiritual traditions, but to build understanding and to serve our community. This series of online workshops for faith leaders fits beautifully in our mission. I think today in particular, it's heartwarming for us to be able to utilize this platform to be able to help partner with you all to do community engagement and outreach. And I really feel like we will take whatever input we give, we'll give it back to you so that you can take it under consideration as you are formulating important policies like this. I want to say a very special thank you to Pastor Glass, because although she confessed she didn't know a whole lot about congestion parking, I think she hit the nail on the head in the very, very beginning by identifying the overarching issue, that being one of equity. And I think she has enough information to offer a whole sermon on this right now as a result of today's conversation. As we're saying thank yous, I want to say thank you to Kaushik Roy, of course, Colin and Paige, and to Nancy and John. This has been a very, very rich conversation. I would be remiss if I didn't say a special thank you to Cynthia Zambucas, who you see her name often, and anytime you get a communication from the San Francisco Interfaith Council, her fingerprints are all over it. She's the administrative and program associate for the council. And a very special thank you to the COVID Command Center Joint Information Center virtual outreach team. I can say that by heart right now after working together so many weeks and months. The coordinator being John McKnight, and today's producer, Lynn Mays, who is assisted by Sharon Walton, Dean Chong, and Trey Russell Allen. We look forward to welcoming you next week. It's going to be a very interesting program. We are going to have the leaders of the Latino Task Force who will share with us the finding and recommendations of their recent report that's been issued, and learn how the Latino community has been impacted in particular by the coronavirus. So again, please join us next week for what promises to be a very important program. That concludes our program for today. Have a beautiful, beautiful rest of the week and weekend. And we look forward to seeing you next week.
Thanks, Michael.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you, Michael, and everyone.